All right, I'll give it a couple of seconds for people to start logging on. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our fireside chat on data analytics in law firms. My name is Nyla Issa, and I'm on the marketing team here at Armanino. I'd like to go through a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You can maximize or minimize the webinar pane during the presentation by using the red, orange arrow buttons in the upper left corner. During the webinar, we also encourage you to ask questions. In the webinar pane, you'll see a questions box that you can use to type your question in and click submit. Our presenters will answer the questions as time permits at the end of the session. Second, for good audio quality, please check your setting to ensure the appropriate audio option is selected. If you're using a telephone, please click on the phone call audio option. If you're listening through your computer, then please click on the computer audio option. As a participant, you'll receive a link to the recorded presentation within 48 hours. Also, as an added bonus, the JP Morgan Chase team is offering free access to JP Morgan Markets to all our attendees. So you'll be receiving a follow-up email from the team after this webinar as well. We have a great session planned for you guys today, where our panelists will discuss the solutions for process improvement, financial results, risk management, options with uncertainty, etc., how to manage your firm using data-powered tools and solutions to enable dynamic decision-making, as well as how to support your firm's needs and ambitions with solutions that will allow you to spend less time on getting the information you need so you can focus more on strategic litigation. Now I'll pass it off to Dean, who will introduce our panelists and get us started.
Thank you so much, Nyla. Really excited for today's topic. I think everybody realizes that digital transformation is real, and every company is going to be a data company in one way or another. So today, let's talk about data and analytics and law firms. First up, why don't we have Aaron Cruz? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Aaron Cruz. I'm the Chief Data Analytics Officer at Lillard Mendelson. So I run our data analytics group, what we're doing around big data, artificial intelligence, and those types of things.
Outstanding. Thank you for joining us today, Aaron. Douglas Gold from MSK.
Hey, how are you? I didn't know we had to introduce ourselves. So let's see, I will remember what I do here. I'm the Chief Financial Officer as well as Chief Marketing Officer for Mitchell Silverberg & Knupp, which sort of puts me at the intersection point of data analytics, pricing, and the like.
Outstanding. Thank you for joining us today, Doug. Hunter.
Sure. Thanks for having us, Dean. So Hunter McMahon, COO for IDS, iDiscovery Solutions. So we're an expert group that comes in and helps clients get their hands around their data when it comes time for litigation or investigations.
Love it. Love it. Caesar.
Thanks, Dean. I'm Cesar Valenzuela. I'm with the Professional Services Group at JP Morgan Chase. We're really helping our clients, especially in today's era, become more efficient and streamline the operations and helping those financial accounting teams be more strategic in their role.
Thank you, Caesar. You already threw everybody a curveball. You're giving away something for free. Look at you. Come on. Everybody loves that. All right, last but not least, my partner in law firm services here at Armanino, Derek Bartow.
Hi, everyone. Derek Bartow. I'm a partner in the firm's law firm services group. We help firms with everything financial and strategy management. It includes helping design partner compensation plans and helping your accounting departments and finance departments produce better, more usable information. Everything revolves around data and analytics.
Outstanding, outstanding. With that said, let's kind of get to it. And maybe the first place that we can start, Aaron and Doug, is to kind of talk about where are we now? What is the status of things? And maybe we can identify, a struggle or a pain point that we're seeing in our clients in terms of data and analytics for law firms.
Doug, after you, my friend.
That's very kind of you. You get the goodwill credits today for the webinar. So that's a great, obviously a pretty meaty question to try to unpack. I think as anyone that's on the call that works in legal or works in and around legal knows that the industry has gone through quite a bit of transformation over the last decade. I think the pressure points that we've seen starting about a decade ago really revolved primarily around pricing. I think that's kind of what started the downhill slide, or uphill slope, depending on which end of the curve you're on. And so getting a grasp on our data was critical. And what we started trying to figure out was, how could we unitize the cost of delivery so that we could get a little bit more constructive in putting together value-added pricing, or value-based pricing. It depends on a lot of people to use different terms in the industry. So rather than just billing by the hour, and the death of the billable hour has been predicted for a long time. I think that we finally saw about a decade ago that tide finally started to turn, and so we quickly started putting together a system that would allow us to dig back into a lot of historical data to try to figure out, depending on the area of practice, what it really costs for us to deliver something to a client. So that's been our focal point, really, is and what keeps me up at night, is making sure that we're getting access to good information so that we can continue to get smarter and more efficient in how we deliver what we do, because of the increasingly competitive atmosphere and the clamoring of clients wanting just a different model.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good, Doug. I mean, that's from operating the firm model. Aaron, quickly, maybe you can kind of talk about when you're helping your clients, and what does that look like with regards to client data on the service side or litigation side?
Yeah, I mean, increasingly, we're seeing that data analytics is the answer to the test when you get to litigation, right? That leveraging data early in litigation allows you to do a bunch of things. So it allows you to identify what are really kind of unassailable facts that, once those are known, they become kind of the linchpin of the legal strategy. And data has a really powerful way of kind of elucidating those facts. So I can give you an example, like in a case, like an employment case, where people allege in a class, right, that they worked a lot of overtime and they never got meal breaks or rest breaks. We can actually, if the client has data, we can actually take that data and use that to rebuild the days of individual class members for each day during the class, and get a real sense of, are these people telling the truth in their allegation, or are they essentially signing up for a check that they think of as free money? And so the ability to really inject that veracity function back into those kinds of claims is a real move forward. And the real pain point there, though, is quality data, right? I mean, in any of this stuff, to Doug's point, it's a GIGO problem. It's garbage in, garbage out. So making sure that you can get data that really kind of speaks to the issues you're trying to understand, and the sooner the better. That's really kind of the key to this whole game.
Dean, if I might add on to that real quick, one of the things that Aaron started talking about is answering questions of fact. And so as we look at this, we got to bear in mind that not all data is created equal, and not all data is created in the way that we think it's created. And therefore, when we go to analyze it, it wasn't built for a way that we need to analyze it to answer the questions we want. And so spending the amount of time and the effort on that early front to really understand the data you have. And I think, Doug, you were talking about this early on in our prep session, is, understanding the underlying data and how it was sourced and how it was created is a critical step in the process, so that you can ultimately answer the questions that Aaron was talking about, and getting those early indicators, whether it's for fee schedules and what was going on, or whether it's for resolving questions of fact in a class action. If you have a misunderstanding about that underlying data, you could be making assumptions and judgment calls and strategy decisions off of a flawed assumption or a flawed understanding. And so taking that time to truly understand it, and making sure that if you have to go back through it, right, that you can actually understand how you got to the answer. I can't tell you how many times we get this is a pretty dashboard, this is amazing, well, how'd you get there? And everybody kind of goes, the goal of this exercise was to get you a pretty dashboard, not to tell you how I got there, right? And while most of the time that's where the strategic decision is going to be, we've got to make sure we have the reliability of the data and the process to get there, so that you can repeat it. And in our instance, defendant, but ultimately in somebody that's in a more in-house position, leverage it with confidence, right? Because you don't want to be making bad decisions off of bad data.
And I think that's one of the areas we see when we see the GIGO. I've never used that before. It's my first time, but garbage in, garbage out issue. A lot of times, Hunter, it's as you mentioned, it's in the assumptions, the underlying data, even if flawed, the flaws are not what kind of wreck the data. It's really the assumptions and understanding that you have the right structure for the data, and the people who are using it with the right assumptions. So that's a very relevant concept that we see. And do you guys have any examples of kind of some flaws in the data that throw off any analysis? I mean, have you seen something that just kills data that could have been avoided?
Oh, the amount of horror stories, but I'll piggyback off that, Derek, slightly, give you an example, and give it back to Aaron, because it'll overlap between our two areas. Is the reuse of employee IDs or device IDs or those type of issues where you're running a data set and you're trying to profile somebody and say a wage and hour class action that Aaron's firm deals with a lot. Well, if you assume that employee ID was only ever issued once, but Derek, Dean, and Caesar happen to have the same one, just different time frames, and you're not triangulating or understanding that data, you could assume that Derek had this big problem when in reality it was 3 different people. And so understanding kind of those underlying things, and I think the trick here, and you said it, Derek, is it's appreciating the nuances of the data. We can't fix the data. The data is what the data is. The data was created in a way that is reality, right? So we've got to understand it so that we can account for it. So that our assumptions, if we make assumptions, are informed assumptions that account for those data anomalies, to know that we have a confidence level of a given number plus or minus, right? So it's often not a matter of perfection at the end of the day, but it's informed analyses that allow you to make a judgment call and a strategy call to solve the case. Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, I was gonna kind of piggyback off of a lot of that. I mean, I think it's the assumptions that are really the issue, right? I mean, it is not abnormal for you to have data that has gaps in it, and so you have to assume or extrapolate across that, right? And I think that's actually where a lot of sort of the trolls are hidden, right? You assume that, to Hunter's point, that all of the employee IDs are single issue, and they're not. You assume that work weeks are even across employees, and they're not, right? You assume pay rates that are, you assume a certain number, and the pay rate is something massively different, right? Those are the places where you go sideways. And I think all the points about data almost never being perfect, right? There is some level of assumptions. There's a relatively famous quote in the data science space. The quote's famous, but I can't remember who said it. But the saying is, all models are wrong, but some models are useful, right? And I think that's one of those things that we actually have to keep kind of in the back of the head when we're doing any kind of data analysis. Is it's a model. And it's only as good as the underlying assumptions that undergird it. And once those underlying assumptions start to spin away from reality, that model gets less and less useful the further from kind of the mean it diverges.
Well, I think that's a great point when you're talking about quality of data and the mean and all that good stuff. I'm already out over my skis a little bit here, but I do want to say, like, does benchmarking play a part in when you're looking at data today? Aaron, Hunter, Doug, are you guys benchmarking anything? Are you looking at anything either from an internal operational side or from an external litigation and client service side?
Aaron, do you want to take that front on the privacy and sharing of information?
Yeah, that's really the problem, right? Everybody wants benchmarking. Everybody always wants benchmarking. I don't know any clients when you sit down with them, and ask for their wish list, that they don't have benchmarking on the list. But when you then ask them, cool, can we use your data for benchmarking? Their answer is always no, right? And usually like an emphatic no, often with like an expletive in front of no. And so they want the output, but they don't want to share their data to create that output, and that ends up being kind of the rub with a lot of things. So for us, we benchmark with clients, but it tends to exist inside of a client's own litigation portfolio. So we can tell them, like, here's what you're doing with us, and here's what that looks like. In a more perfect world, right, we would take all of the data related to their entire litigation portfolio. The fact that we are a labor and employment firm probably has something to do with that. If we were a more general services firm, we might be able to see like a slightly larger footprint of what they're doing. But I think a lot of benchmarking in terms of when you're looking at things like litigation, you're either using publicly available data, which is obviously incomplete, or client data. And in a perfect world, you're probably using client data that is enriched by the public data in order to give them some semblance of here's what you look like vis-a-vis things that might be your peers. But getting people to allow that sharing, right? And it's because of data security concerns, because of privacy concerns, because of privilege concerns. You get into a pretty thorn-filled thicket pretty quickly.
Great. Hunter, Doug, anything you want to add on there with regards to benchmarking? Are you looking at any metrics when you manage your operations internally? Is there any benchmarking that you do or that you like to rely on? And Hunter, in the delivery of what you guys do, any other comments there?
Mr. Doug.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. We're not doing a tremendous amount on the external things as it relates to matter management with the clients, so that part's not relevant. But on the internal, I think there's probably a little bit more information that you can troll around for to find, average resolution time on particular types of matters and things like that actually end up being quite relevant to our own internal analysis. And then when we had gone through that data scrubbing process, and we were talking about that, just before this commentary, that was a big part of our initiative. And I kind of liken it to the dirty data problem that exists in healthcare, which in the electronic health record systems, for example, everything that happens inside the EHRs is stored in local time except for the birth of a baby, which is stored in Greenwich Mean Time, which means you could theoretically, looking at the data the wrong way, you could end up having a baby born before they got to the hospital. So examples like that exist in legal too, right? Where you've got just a ton of task coding mismatches between what the narrative says and what the task code is. And so you got to do a lot of cleanup to be able to make the data make sense. And so we did that in connection with the benchmarking to say, well, is this normal? It took us 237 days to resolve this matter from start to finish. What's the industry average? And so we tried to use it in relationship to that.
Love it. When go ahead.
You brought up a good point, Doug, and this kind of question for you and Aaron. Aaron, you had talked about the labor wages, and I saw a couple of years ago, a significant amount of middle market clients being impacted by these employee break wages lawsuits that were happening in California. And when you talk to the corporate clients, their main interest was, let's resolve this at the most cost-effective way possible. They don't want to litigate it. They want to just settle it. How are you using benchmarking data to help them figure out what is the right settlement amount in order to reduce and minimize the costs associated with these lawsuits?
It's a really good question, Caesar. And I think you can use, so there are a couple of sources of data if you're a firm, right? So there's the publicly available data of settlements that have been confirmed by the court, right? So those are available and you can kind of see where courts have signed off, although that's obviously not all settlements because it's not required in all cases and whatever. So you have that data set. You also have, if you're doing a lot of work for that client and a lot of that kind of work, right, what you can look at is your own internal data around how you're settling those kinds of cases historically, looking at kind of number of plaintiffs and kinds of claims and the venue that it's in. And so you can get pretty granular in terms of what you look at to kind of get a sense of what similar size claims are settling for. But then I think really the magic bullet in it is to take those benchmarks and kind of use those as maybe bookends, but then to use the client's own data to actually calculate out where the actual liability probably sits, and to do an actual liability analysis, because that liability analysis should then really drive the settlement strategy, right? I mean, a lot of times we see arguments, for very, very large damages, and when you get in and you actually look at the data themselves don't support those claims, and that can be a really powerful argument in front of a mediator or an arbitrator, or even just talking to the other side about, hey, like, here's a real number that attaches to this matter.
So I'll piggyback off of what Aaron was saying, Caesar, and offer the narrowed scope of answering the questions of fact, right? So we develop what we call claims and defense algorithms. We're either proving a claim or proving a defense. And so this goes to exactly what Aaron is talking about. Are the claims real? So did they not get a break? Or did they get a break and they're just not saying they're getting a break? And oftentimes it's somewhere in between. So we've had the cases where it took me 15 minutes to log into my computer to be able to clock in, when in reality, it might have felt like 15, but it was 5. And on occasion, once a week on Mondays, it was 7 kind of scenarios, right? And so we leveraged the client's own data to start resolving those questions of fact. And we were in mediation a few months ago with an in-house counsel and their outside counsel, and in-house counsel lost it and just kind of went, I'm not settling this for averages of averages of averages when I have the data and I can actually answer the questions. And so at that point, it was one of those scenarios which Aaron was talking about. We've got the bookends. They know kind of general range of what would be accepted and what the original ask is normally. And then there's some kind of reality that happens in the middle. But the more data you have to be able to define that reality, to get to a more confident position, as opposed to theoretically, well, we think it averagely happened this much on average. And, it didn't happen all the time because Caesar said it didn't happen all the time. But if I got the data to say, oh no, it didn't happen all the time, it was isolated to these 4 people and it was isolated to this location and this supervisor, it is not a 1,000 employee problem. It is a 5 employee problem. It's a lot different conversation you can have.
Love it, love it. So, obviously data is playing an impact today directly for the clients and the process to get there. Why don't we talk a little bit about the investment of building this for your firm? Our firm's building this. Are they outsourcing it? What does it look like? Doug, we'll start with you at MSK. Is this something that you guys are building internally? Are you trying to find external partners? How is this going for you guys?
Yeah, our initiative started with an internal self-built homegrown system. Part of that was really predicated on the fact that we've been around long enough where we still have a few folks at the firm that are still using typewriters, and so when you've got the implementation of a tech stack that occurs over decades versus hey, if we were going to start a firm today, what would we do? You've got different options available, and so we're on the elite system, which has its own bugaboos because of the architecture and the database structure, which is not the easiest thing in the world to work with. So our starting point was maybe a little messy, and so we had to get a lot of chewing gum and Band-Aids to try to build on top of this thing, just a simple SQL database that would do the appropriate pings to go find the data, do the cleanup process that I was describing earlier, and then try to present it in a way that would make sense. And so when we looked at a couple systems out there, doing an off-the-shelf purchase and doing some configuration wasn't going to make sense. We're now going through a bit of a reassessment and trying to examine the possibility of doing a wholesale overhaul of the entire systems, in which case, I think what we'll be using 2 or 3 years from now is going to look very different than what it is today. But for now, we've chosen to just build it on our own.
Got it.
Doug, I'm sorry, Dean, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I just saying that that's a challenge that a lot of the folks on the call probably have is dealing with the culture issues and kind of educating people who may still be using typewriters or seem like they're still using typewriters on the value of this and to make the investment. It sounds like it's been a long road. Is there anything that you've done to educate the people at your firm and those in a leadership position to help support the project and get to the point where you can say, I'm confident that changes will be made?
Yeah, we look, there's still some of our partners that don't even realize we're doing this, right? And that's was also went into our decision-making process of what we decided to do, which was to build something small to get it off the ground and do some proof point building, because from a political perspective, we had to and continue and will continue to be, I think, for a long time, selling the concept. And back to the conversations we were having earlier about the quality of data. You get this wrong once, you're set back for years. You'll never politically win them over again. And so we wanted to make sure we were doing it right. So for the first 2 years we were building this thing, there were 4 people in the firm that knew we were even building it and playing with it, starting to accumulate the information, to try to make sense out of the data, to make sure, because we didn't really know what we were going to find. It was a treasure hunt, right? We're like, I wonder what we could get out of the system. I wonder what we could do this way. I wonder if we could make it do this, and I wonder if we could break the data down in a way that would have it make sense, where, and then not only will you have the data make sense, but then can you present it in a way that will make sense to lawyers? And so there was a whole presentation layer discussion, right? And so we're still, honestly, to be perfectly candid, we're still working that part out. We wouldn't ever let any of our internal folks ever see the system. We're still, there's a few of us that will take it and format it and then present the information and not let them see the sausage making, because it's not in an appropriate presentation form, which speaks to some of the limitations of a 130 lawyer firm compared to a firm of Aaron's size, where you probably have a few more resources that you can throw at making things look better. So we've been really crawling, walking, running is the strategy we're trying to take.
Love it, Doug. I love it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Aaron, is it just full adoption? Is everybody at Littler just like, give me all the data and analytics? Are they all just pounding down your door for you and your team, or kind of what's the status of that at Littler?
Yeah, no. We have folks who are fans. We have folks who are kind of in the middle, and then we have folks who don't even know we exist. And that's, I think, just the nature of lawyers, right? And it's a constant game of trying to educate people about kind of what the resources are and how to use them. And of the lawyers we have in each of those 3 buckets, the last bucket, obviously, if they don't know we exist, they don't come and talk very often. We try to go talk to them and kind of scrounge them up, and convert them into one of the other 2 buckets, right? But the other 2 buckets, the thing, the people who love us and use us, they kind of split half and half. Some of them who really understand how to use us, and some of them who sort of show up with data and they're like, need analysis, right? Which is kind of a process that, part of the art is asking, what questions are you trying to answer? What things are you trying to understand? Kind of really getting a sense of what analysis would be appropriate, and then can that be done with the data that you've been provided? So we go through that a lot. And that investment conversation is a hard one. I mean, it's just, there's a whole world of the possible, and whether or not folks kind of jump on that strategy or decide to go somewhere else is really kind of the trick as to, in terms of how far and how fast things go.
Awesome.
Aaron,
when it comes to investment, please go ahead.
Dean. Right, to follow up on that question, have you seen, for those that are proactively using your team and using data analytics, are you seeing a noticeable difference in their ability to bring in revenue and bring in new business to the firm?
Yeah, we have seen that this data analytics, the client-facing data analytics piece, is a significant differentiator, particularly when you get into the beauty contests of us versus 5 other firms. The fact that we have the ability to do this in-house as an integrated part of the litigation team is a really significant differentiator for a lot of clients. It fundamentally sort of shifts the field in a way that's more favorable to the client than some of the more traditional structures.
Yeah, we've experienced that as well. Well, of course, I want to take credit for all the growth in revenue, right? But I do think I've got one partner in particular who was one of our early pilots and guinea pigs, and he took to it well. And I'm not kidding. His book has doubled in the last 2 years, and I think that there's a bunch of ingredients that go into making that happen. But I think having him have access to information and being able to pitch a little bit more intelligently has been really critical. And then we've also managed to increase realization rates on some of the more challenging matters that we work on a regular basis with one particular client. Just getting access on a weekly basis to budget versus actual and tracking matters more closely and getting better accuracy in coding information so that we know what matters, what doesn't. Then you got the billing issues where you get, time entries get rejected all the time if you're not packaging things right. So just being able to proactively go, okay, if we submit this bill, 20% of it's going to get dinged because we just plain old didn't code it right. Even though we did the work, what was appropriate, it was a coding problem, not a work problem. So that's helped a lot as well.
Aaron, there's probably a lot of people on the line that are like, okay, I get it. I think our firm should probably start thinking about how we're going to use data and analytics. We're going to build it internally. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a roadmap or a history map for you and your experience. Like a couple years ago when you started doing this, the team, what was its origins? What was its size? Where is it today? And then maybe, as adoption is picking up more and more at Lillard, what does it look like in the future? Give us a little insight into that.
So, we started as a team of about 6, and over the last 3 years, we've grown to be a team of about 26. So, pretty significant growth over the last 3 years. And we've grown really behind the work. So really the team should probably be a little bigger than it is. We're always kind of slightly underwater, just because of the nature of more work than we have hands a lot of the time. And so, it really has been about generating adoption. And then once you catch that adoption, making sure that you've got kind of the right size team in order to fulfill kind of the work that you've got, right? So for us, kind of a really quick scale up, and candidly, we're kind of at a spot right now where we're trying to make some decisions about what happens in the future. Do we keep it this size? Do we grow it? Do we do something fundamentally different with it in terms of kind of where it sits and how it sits? That's a discussion we're having right now, and it's really that's really an investment appetite more than anything else. And that one, it becomes part of the strategy of the firm, right? Are they going to really are they going to double down on it? We're going to leave it where it is. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out yet. I mean, it's a discussion we're having. We think that this has been a really successful function and adds value for clients and adds value to the firm's bottom line. But whether or not, we double down and go big or not is an open question at the moment.
Hunter, your firm, your organization is helping law firms do this stuff. I think people turn to you and say, hey, you know what? You have the expertise. Can you help us? What are you seeing and hearing from the firms today when they want to kind of, use you guys or explore using you guys?
I love it when they outsource and they don't build it like Doug. That's music to my ear. But I think one of the distinctions is there's the informed buyer, the one that has seen the benefit and kind of wants to make it their own and curated to their area. And like Doug was saying, build their book, right? They want to leverage this add-on to their service as a strategic advantage to them. The other side of it, though, are the ones that they haven't, but they know they need to, but they don't know how to present it to their client yet because they haven't felt the benefit of it. So how do I go convince a client to spend money on something that they have yet to feel the benefit of? Because again, we're primarily answering questions in the midst of a litigation or investigation or something like that. So we're not doing it in-house for the firms per se. And I think one of the areas that we're focused on is it's a bit of education, but education is academic, right? So how do you look and feel and touch that? But how do you make sure you can translate that to your client's situation? But then I think you've also got to focus on the client specific situation and the questions that they can answer. And so I often phrase our engagements are built like the LA freeway system. You know, there's an exit off ramp every half a mile. Unlike in the South, man, you can go 25 miles and never see an off ramp. The idea there, though, is that it's got to be a very highly collaborative and highly iterative process. You can't get so far down into an analysis that you lose sight of the purpose. Because if you found something in that first, call it 10th of the analysis that could change their direction, their strategy, how they're going to resolve that issue for the client, you've got to be able to hit pause. You can't build your analyses in a way that are so complex. You can't get early ROI out of it. And so I think Doug said something earlier, right? Like it's this way of building trust over the course of time. And it's this incremental trust, not this one fell swoop trust. And so we've really focused on how we can make that a more palatable first level experience, as opposed to, I got to go all in, I'm putting all my eggs in this basket. You know, that's usually a very hesitant way or high hurdle of a way to get a new adopter for somebody that hasn't had the experience and the success with it.
That's very insightful, Hunter. Thank you. Derek, you're helping organizations who want to look at their internal data for better metrics, running a leaner, better law firm machine. For those who don't want to build it internally, they're turning to you and saying, hey, can you help me build this? What are you seeing in the marketplace on that side of the house?
Yeah, and you know, we see a lot of different things on that side. It's really, maybe the Wild West isn't the right example, but there are just a lot of variations, you know, given what Doug mentioned with, you know, the typewriters and just a lot of different personalities. So, you know, the way firms will be successful really depends a lot on their culture and their practices and what they really need. But you know, really seeing what works out there, you know, echoing a few points, Hunter, you touched on a lot of them. Keeping it simple, you know, making sure that, you know, we're really looking at some core data and looking at it frequently. So exposing that information and making it available for those who need it on a regular basis does a couple things. You know, one, it starts to get you used to a process around that data, and two, by exposing it, you can see the anomalies in the issues that come up with the data inputs. So kind of controlling your assumptions and getting people that are familiar with the data that look at it often can see, oh, you know, somebody put in, you know, 16 hours on this day. That doesn't seem right. Let me go back and check. And oh, that was a, you know, that was a miskey. You know, it was supposed to be a 1.6. And it just, you know, it kind of puts it in front of you, and you're able to see and manage this data. And you can't manage what you don't measure is I think an overcomplication of what I'm seeing as successful. It's like not even measure it, just kind of look at it, start to get a feel for the data structures. And when you expose it and can see it, then you can start to do something about it, and it's more natural. So not making it complex and keeping it really simple is a key concept that firms need to exercise to be successful. And by doing that, you end up, you collaborate with others in the firm, you kind of work with a team to use this data to improve something. So what we're seeing as successful is simplicity. When you start to get too complex, and the complex, you know, dashboards, Hunter, you mentioned it before, you know, hey, we built you a pretty dashboard. Great. What does it do for me? Well, nothing, because we can't verify the information. It takes too long to prepare this. There's too much manipulation that's needed. Hey, let's start simple and build out from there. And you can ultimately get to what's necessary. And we've seen clients successful in doing this. We help clients set up their infrastructures to get to be doing this. And we at Armanino have done it as well. It's been an evolution that we've had when we've exposed our data in different ways. We've really turned our practice managers into, you know, more effective business leaders because they are empowered with this information.
Hey, Derek, can I? Sorry, Hunter. Can I? 1 second. Can I just follow on with that, because it's a very interesting kind of way of doing it, right? The offering it as a service in order to kind of show people where the value is. Kind of letting them, you know, tiptoe into the water, because Hunter's team does something like that on the litigation side of the house. they've got a software package called XIOT that allows essentially law firms that don't have the kind of infrastructure internally to do the kind of litigation focused data analysis. They've got that where they offer it as a service, right? So a lot of the stuff that like my team is doing today, you can essentially, if you don't have that infrastructure built in-house, you can roll to a provider like an IDS and ask them to work with you on building one of those out, right? And it's a really good way of, again, because it kind of provides the answers to the test inside of a piece of litigation, it gives you that vehicle for showing the value so that you can then make the argument that, hey, we should go deeper into this pool.
So Derek, to emphasize something that you pointed out though, and I think it's critical, especially for those internal dashboards, which we constantly ask the question of our own dashboards, right? Our own internal ops is, this is a great metric. What does it do for me? Right? It's the, okay, I now know this number, but what am I going to do with this number? Or what Aaron was just talking about, okay, I know this fact. What am I going to do with this fact, right? So with litigation, it's great because first thing we do out of the gate is ask clients, what questions or facts are you trying to resolve? So we focus on that, not a pretty picture, because a pretty picture could be a pretty picture, but it's not relevant to the litigation. And what you said, and we struggled when we set up our new dashboards last year, was, okay, if we see these indicators, if we're seeing this trend line, if we're seeing this information, what does it actually trigger for us, right? And so we actually we did a whole bunch of manipulating of it in a way that says, okay, if this happens for 3 weeks in a row, certain things get dropped down to an issues list that we will then investigate because it's a trend line as opposed to a 1 week anomaly. And so we look for things like that. But if you don't have that mindset with any kind of dashboard or any kind of analytics, you're kind of just getting a pretty picture for probably a pretty penny.
Oh yeah, and that's a key point. You know, what are you going to do with it? And on the internal side, you know, looking at certain metrics that are going to drive profitability. Doug, I think you said it in some of our prep sessions. Is, you know, profitability and compensation are what drive everything here. So on the internal side, how is what we're doing producing those results, and how do we boil that down? Whether it's our realization, or our write-offs, or our effective rates, our AR and the quality of our AR and how we manage it. So, you know, helping firms focus. One, what we do when we get in and help is we'll help firms kind of clear the noise. There's a lot of noise when you first start to build this data structure. You don't know what's right and what to look at. So we'll help clear the noise, help develop the systems to get the right information to the right people, and then help to build the processes to manage it. And I think that's what's really important, keeping it simple and doing that. As it relates to, Doug, as you said, you know, the compensation and the profitability, and it's what we're all trying to get to. So that's when we can do that, it's really successful and really valuable, and not as complex as you think. To get to that point, it's there, and I think just the, you know, demystifying it a little bit, and I hope we're doing that in this conversation, really helps clear the way for you know, a great use of data and analytics to support improved profits.
Well, Doug, I mean, when you talk about compensation and you talk about profitability of clients, you know, how is that? Are you guys doing that now? How does that work? Is that a easy conversation? Is it very, let's navigate these waters? I'm assuming you got to navigate that very carefully, probably.
Oh, it's so easy to have conversations with people about money. I don't know why everyone's so afraid of it. Look, you get, that's exactly what the issue is, right? You can measure and quantify and clean up data and present all this. You can spend all day doing that. Ultimately, it's to try to drive towards a particular objective. But if you culturally haven't gone through the appropriate expectation setting and socializing, you're gonna run full speed doing all this stuff and run right into a brick wall. And so I think it's always hard for folks like Aaron and I in our roles, is you're and even Derek when he's doing it on behalf of clients, which he's helped us with some things in the past and is aware of culturally what goes on in our firm, where you've got to really be, you got to think before you step, or you very quickly end up on a landmine. And back to my earlier comments about you got one shot on the credibility scale, and same thing here. So we're in the very early stages of talking about client profitability, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's not about, oh, what can you squeeze out of a client? It's about being efficient and making sure that you're giving them the best value for the best dollar, and that means you've got to really measure what you do internally and do it as efficiently as possible. And so ultimately, if we can push towards improved profitability with matters, you're going to be able to answer the question, is two people with $1 million book of business equal, or is one worth more than the other in the marketplace? And so there's obviously a bunch of questions you got to go through and answer before it's not just a slam dunk yes, no. Sometimes there are some practice areas that you need to have, and you just need to live with it not being as profitable, right? So it's not always just oh, well, if they're less profitable, they should make less money. There's much more nuance to it, but you've got to really go through it. I think you've got to understand where you're trying to get to, and then you really got to go, depending on your firm and its culture, you've really got to go through a lot of socializing and getting people to understand, and they know what's coming, by the way. If you start presenting data and start talking about profitability without ever talking about how it may or may not tie to compensation, they know where you're going with it. They're not these are incredibly bright people, right? Yeah. So that's the hard part of working with really smart people every day, is they instantly go, well, why are you showing this to me, and what does it mean? So we've had to really think. Yeah, you got to think several steps ahead.
Love it. Aaron at Lidler, are you guys having some of the same conversations? I mean, you're running the data team. Are they kind of slicing and dicing things in that way too?
Yeah, for sure. At least that's part of the conversation, right? Is can we get better looks at kind of the business and what's profitable and what's not? Can we model clients who are going to become whales, right? What does a client, like, what's the model of a client that grows into being a monster, right? And then can you use that to identify those guys early and put resources behind developing those clients, as opposed to maybe clients that, they're only going to get to X size and then plateau, or you may chase them forever and never get them.
So I love that. I mean, you're looking at the commonalities of your clients and slicing and dicing the different parameters. I think that's really good. Something that we also do here at Armanino is we always look at, what are the ones that are going to grow, and how can we be the right partner for them as they navigate what's ahead for them. Really, really good information. Let's see here. What about so we talked about internally. I think I do have a question though. As organizations are starting down this path, Doug, you've been, been living this for a while, right? Some internal things that you've been doing. Aaron, you've been doing this for a long time as a service for your firm. If you kind of had to go back and share some key learnings, or like, here's the number one tip I'd like to give you if I were to go rewalk that path that I just got down, what would you say to someone, Doug, and then Aaron you can go after.
I think in hindsight, the having someone on your team that is primarily responsible for the initiative, that can really connect the dots between understanding how data flows and having some familiarity with databases and structure, right? And what the power of decision making is on the at the end of the trail, right? And then being able to drill and pull those two things back together, because I think some of this is linear and very sequential. Some of it you're running parallel paths that get back to the politics of things. And so having a green visor person that only knows how to maybe chop wood and go really, really fast and really do a great job of the data, if they don't have any sensibility for how it's ultimately going to get packaged and what the challenging conversations might look like, they're not always going to make the best decisions when it comes to doing some coding. I mean, it's crazy to think that it's those things are connected, but they really are. So I think we learned that the hard way. I think we bloodied our knuckles early on in being a little bit too data driven, and that was all my fault because I didn't keep my fingerprints on it enough. And the guy that I had running it was a green visor type who was really great at his job and doing that part, but wasn't connecting the dots. And I assumed, shame on me, that he was thinking ahead and I wasn't. And so we had to sort of take a couple steps back and almost start over.
Yeah, so I'd like to echo something that Doug was saying in a slightly different context of when we're trying to investigate something. It's usually we'll get the, can you run this report? And our team will often push back and say, okay, absolutely happy to, but what's the goal of this? What questions are you trying to answer? Would it be helpful if? And oftentimes what happens is there's a disconnect between what I'll call the non-techie person and the techie person. They almost speak two different languages. I mean, they're both English, but arguably different languages from the standpoint of, while the non-techie will say something and they will assume that you will take all of these other things into consideration because in their world that's obvious, but for a technician, it's an execution task, right? They're doing what they were asked. And so if you break that context, like Doug was talking about, right? And if you don't have everybody on the same page, actually understanding what the goal is of running the data analysis, then you're stuck in this position where you got a pretty dashboard with an answer. It could be good or it could be bad. And it doesn't actually address the problem at all because there was this complete disconnect between, the what they wanted and what they got kind of situation. And so it's literally making sure that all parties are sitting there at the table and making sure that everybody understands the goal, not just the problem.
Just rub it in, Hunter. That was great. Just pour that salt right in the wound, man. It's like you're singing my song sheet. It's like you knew exactly what we went through.
Don't worry, Doug, you're not alone. We've all been there, right? I mean, I remember sending some spectacular reports early on in some big analyses, and then they're like, that's great. So this means this, and you're like, no, not at all. How are you reading the report wrong? And they're like, how are you telling me that the report is not like total disconnect? But it was just, it was, a couple terms that we both interpreted differently.
Yeah, technical people and lawyers are like Americans and British, right? Two people separated by a common language. I mean, it's a complete problem all the time, and doesn't just live in the technical space. And I think that there's a kind of a corollary to all of that, which is if you're going to try to set something like this up, right? Having a conversation at the beginning of what are the desired outcomes in terms of the program, and really thinking about that in like a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year kind of scenario. Because one of the things, like the thing that we keep bumping our toes on in this process is growth. We've grown really fast, and that creates some challenges. And being able to get people who are used to evaluating a program or a practice group inside of a law firm based on utilization. Is everybody in the group billing 1,900 hours? When that really isn't the right metric, right? Kind of having those discussions on the front end, I think contribute to success in this space. And because it's along the lines of saying, what question are you trying to answer? At the very beginning of the program, saying, what outcomes are you hoping for, or are we hoping for, so that you are able to build kind of a consolidated vision between your analytics group and leadership, who's going to be kind of evaluating that group in terms of what is success, so that everybody's speaking the same language. Because I do think that is a space where people talk past each other a lot, and it creates a lot of heartburn and a lot of friction.
Awesome. Well, I mean, there's been so many knowledge bombs dropped in this little 1-hour session. I do want to give everybody 5 minutes as we transition to our next calls, as we all know that we're all back to back in this very busy quarantine world. But this has been fabulous. We are going to do it again next quarter. We don't know the topic quite yet, but I promise you it'll deliver just like I thought we delivered today. Doug from MSK, Aaron from Lidler, Caesar from Chase, Derek from Armanino, Hunter from IDS. Thank you so much. We look forward to doing this again next quarter and giving real value to all the law firms out there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.